All right, so welcome everyone. Today, again, we're covering the labels feature in ARM, both the built-in labels that ARM offers, which has some barcode and subsampling capability, and then also we'll show the slightly newer feature of creating your own custom labels with ARM. So without further ado, let's dive in here. So to kind of introduce what ARM offers as kind of the standard labels, they've been in ARM for quite a few number of years of just some particular labels, kind of hard coded, if you will, with the structure and what is offered. And so there's kind of 4 different categories that ARM has, whether you're using the label for a container, going to label the plot itself, seed packets, and also harvest are the main categories. And we'll see in a moment from the list, there are a variety of options in each category. Some of them may contain barcodes, like the one here on the screen might have a barcode, and some of them also have subsampling options that we will kind of hands-on investigate. And then really the task is to look at whatever label size or template that you're using, that you want to print out to, and make the ARM options match that. So that way the report that is generated will fit nicely on top of those labels when you print them out. And a friendly tip that might save a little bit of those labels is once you think you get it right, print it out on just a regular piece of paper first, and then set that paper on top of your actual labels and make sure that you have the margins right and everything. It's a whole lot cheaper to print another regular piece of paper than it is to throw away the whole label sheet, if you will. So that's kind of our overview of the built-in labels. So I've got a trial open here in ARM, and you can access the labels just through the general print reports, whether you use the printer button on the toolbar, or if you're a file person or a menu person, file print reports will get you there as well. And they are specific to a trial. So in a protocol, we don't have the label options, but under the trial list of available reports, there is a labels heading. And so you can see as I expand that labels out, there is a long list of labels that we have to choose from. And so we kind of tried to group them together. So there's a heading of sorts here for the container. These then would be all of the container labels that we offer. And then scrolling down, there's a section for plot labels, seed packets, and harvest, as we had mentioned. So try to just categorize those to organize them a little bit. Once you select one of them, of course, as any report does, we get to see the report options then on the main portion of the screen. And so really the options pretty much just consist of that page setup. What is the size and shape, and how many labels do you have on the page? And so that is the options here, which you could match up with whatever specification you have for the label sheet you want to use. If you are using kind of a built-in one, of course, the nice thing, for example, if you're using the Avery labels, there's a fair number of them. They've made it a point to have them size the same and give that a number, that set up a number. So we do have a few defaults here. So for example, if I'm looking at my Avery 5160 is the label sheet that I have, then I just have to select that default and the appropriate options will be chosen for me. So you can see if I pick a few different defaults, you'll notice that the options here on the left are changing to match kind of that default, that predefined specification of what that would be. So we've got got a few built-in ones with ARM. Of course, if you're using something different, you can, choose the right size. I'm just going to make up numbers. I don't have a real one next to me to reference, but then you can use the Save New Default. And so it's kind of like a report set if you've used the report sets before, encapsulating these options, but kind of a narrow focus for this default to be just these half dozen options, and bundle that into a default that will go in this list. So if I'd save a new default and just call it, I'm just going to call it webinar. Of course, you'd want to describe it as something a little more useful, then you'll see that it is now added to my list here. So if you don't have the sheets you typically use, but you do have a favorite that you tend to use all the time, that can be a nice way to save those options for reuse. So stepping back to our list of labels, you can see we try to just title each one, kind of describe what it's for. In this case, it's a container. We get one label for each treatment line, and it looks like the plot number is larger than maybe this previous one. Of course, that can only go so far as your imagination may take you, so it can be handy to use the Report Preview tab. And if I select that report preview, it will preview whichever report I've selected, either in the available reports, or if I had it in my report set, it would also do it there. And so that can be a nice way to kind of compare the difference. So this is what our labels will look like for this trial. If I wanted to compare it, all I have to do is select a different report on the left, and the preview itself will remain open and refresh to what this looks like. So we can see in this case, it's pretty much the same label. Let me zoom in a little bit in case that's small, but we can see it's basically the same label, but the plot size is just the same size of text compared to going to this next one. We'll see how the plot sizes are bold and larger. So that can be a handy way just to kind of browse and see, all right, what are my options? What would I get here for this trial? What are these labels going to look like? Does it have all of the information that I want to have? And once you find the one you like, then of course, as any typical report you would do, you can add the selected one to your report set. And that will then be included in your printout when we press next to move on to the next step. Kind of a best practice, of course, might be obvious, but typically if you're doing labels, you would really only want to select your label in this report set. It wouldn't make a lot of sense to try to also put in an AOV means table or something like that, because you're going to want to load your printer with just the label sheet that you're going to print out. So you'd want to kind of keep that separate. So just real quick, we kind of saw a few of these container options. They're kind of tied around your treatment. So your treatment list will really control how many labels you get. Looking at the plots, of course, so that's kind of a different part of your trial. Now you're going to, in this case, it's only one per treatment still, and it's going to give us the list of plots where that treatment is at. But here's something like a plot label of one per plot. Now we get a label generated for 101, 102, 103, etc. So we got a lot more labels to be used for each plot. And of course, just depending on which one you pick, we'll get to that subsample one later. We have different setups. Then seed packets. In this case, it's trying to kind of filter down my list of treatments, and it would choose only treatment lines or treatment components that have a variety. So just looking at your treatment list, that treatment type column. If it was seed or variety, then ARM would choose just those components to print out my labels. So to really focus in on seed packets, of course, I wouldn't need a label for a fungicide product. I would only want a label for my seed information that's in my treatment list. So that's really what ARM is offering to do. But of course, in my example, this isn't a variety study, so I don't have any treatments that are just a variety treatment. So recognizing that, ARM says, well, I could give you absolutely nothing if I said no, or I can create these labels for all of your treatments, even though that might not necessarily make sense. And so that's what we get here, is our seed packets for every treatment, even though that probably doesn't make tons of sense in our particular trial. And then finally, harvest again, pretty similar as well. In this case, kind of plot oriented, and just depending on what information you want to include and kind of how it's displayed on the label. There really isn't much correction that ARM does to the shape of the label content based on your size options. So that can be another part of your selection criteria as you're clicking through these options, is does it fit nicely on my label? There's a chance that it doesn't, just based on how it's defined. In this case, it's a little bit taller. So maybe if you had really narrow and wide labels, this one might not be a good fit. So that's a good preview way to make sure that you even have a label that'll fit nicely with the size that you're trying to fit onto. So that's really our built-in labels in general. I wanted to cherry pick a couple of these here to specify a couple of different ones. Here I want to do my barcode first. So in this name, you can see we reference barcode. So that's one cue that we actually have a barcode in a label or not. If I just zoom in to view a couple of labels, you'll see that we have a barcode, which consists of, in this case, our trial ID with our treatment number, plot number, and perhaps our subsample. This one kind of had 2 in 1. I'm looking for a barcode that'd be a little simpler, but I don't see it here. There we go. Let's do this harvest bag with the barcode. So in this case, the barcode is just the plot number. You can just see down below that text. That's the reason I know what that barcode even is it has that text underneath to kind of tell me it's 101. So I know that that barcode is actually just the plot number. So if it has the word barcode in its name, you'll see the barcode on the label. And actually, in this case, the name tells me that the barcode consists of the trial and the treatment and the plot number. So hopefully the name given in this list give you an indication of what you're getting yourself into, if you will. So that can be useful for scanning if you have a barcode scanner, being able to generate that in a label. Another option would be our subsampling, and I've accidentally clicked on a couple. So let's see if I can find those again. The keyword you will see in the title will be sample. Here we go. So we have the large plot number sample. And so that is kind of a keyword here that you can generate multiple labels per, in this case, per plot for the number of subsamples. And so when you select to either preview or generate that label, then there is a prompt for you to create the subsamples and really give them a name. So in my case, if I want to be really simple, I can just type in 1 to identify the first subsample, and I'm going to press enter to kind of solidify that as the first subsample. And then I'll give the second one a name, and so on and so forth. So if I have 5 subsamples that I would want, so I want 5 different labels for every plot in my trial, then this will be the approach I would take, is put 5 different lines of text. And in this case, I'm just referring to the number as the subsample. You could certainly refer to anything you would like. And so when I press OK, now we will get a label. If I zoom out just a little bit so we can see a few labels at once, I have a label for plot 101, sample 1. And now, again, that same plot, a second subsample, then a third, fourth, and fifth. So that each line that I filled in that dialog then gave me another label for that plot. And then it begins with plot 102, sample 1, 102, sample 2, etc. And that number, I just put in the number there to be clear. But if I wanted to, if I had some other term I wanted to use, in my case, I don't feel very brave, so I'm just going to type the number. Whatever text you enter in that line will be the text of, what that label uses for that sample. So now we've got that 1 and 2. And that can even be included with the barcode as well. If you had a barcode, maybe I'll do that same approach. And if I zoom in here, in this label, my barcode contains that subsample character. So that barcode literally has 101 and that text 1 that I entered in. And then the next sample, again, still that plot 101, but now that text that I entered as the second. So some flexibility depending on what you might have set up for your trial, if those subsamples somehow have a name. Just know that prompting happens every time when you generate those labels. So the text that I entered isn't saved. If I were to save like a report set or something like that, that subsample information is entered each time and not like hard-coded or saved into that label necessarily. One other option, kind of a common question when looking at the labels in ARM, so far I've kind of mostly just been referring to a label sheet where you have multiple labels on a page, typically about the standard page size, could be larger depending on your label. But there is another type of label printer, a continuous or a roll printer. I've just got a picture of our Dymo that we have in our office. There's I'm sure quite a variety of different manufacturers, but that was just the one we had handy. But just to visualize that, really instead of a full sheet that you're printing out all at once, this printer just goes one by one and generates one label and then rolls to the next and generates the next one and the next one. It is possible to use these built-in labels with this type of printer. There's just a little trick to it. So I kind of wanted to outline the trick per se to make it work. And essentially, instead of having ARM believe that the page size is the 8.5 by 11 with all of these labels on it, we kind of just trick ARM into thinking that the page size is so small, you're only going to fit one label on it. And thus, you're going to have a whole bunch of pages you have to print. And that's really the way to have ARM communicate effectively with a label printer to say, I'm going to need 50 sheets of paper, more or less, because it really is just 50 individual labels. So this is really the checklist, if you will, to follow to accomplish that. You would set the rows and the columns to 1. So there's only 1 column and 1 row on each sheet of paper. And then the height and the width for each individual label is really the height and the width of that one label that we're going to print. Then, of course, we want the margins to be 0, most likely, unless you were doing some magic within your label. I think you would want the margins to be 0. And then the final trick that I think is the trickiest part that isn't super obvious, but if you go into File and Print Setup, you can change your paper size. And that would, then you would want to match that paper size with your label height and width. So just to show real quick. Oops, going too fast here. We want to go to Print Setup. I always get those two confused. Under Print Setup, then you want to go into the properties for your printer. And then this next one is going to vary depending on your printer. You can see this is kind of controlled by HP because I have an HP printer connected right now, which is not a roll printer. So I would imagine the option we're looking for will be a little more easy to find if you are connected to a continuous printer like that. But yeah, we would go in here and change the paper size to be whatever size we would need to match that label. And in my case, it's a regular office printer, so it's doubtful that that would be what we'd want to do. So those are the main two options there, 2 things to set. And now ARM, then kind of everything else we showed about selecting your labels will work just fine. And then it'll just be printing each one of those labels on its own sheet instead of trying to squish them all together. So a question here about the barcodes, using that with a tablet or something like that to do some data entry. We do have a tool in ARM, so it would also be available on the TDC, the Tablet Data Collector. Under the Tools menu, you can read from Scanner. So this would be great for data collection. Let's say you printed out, plot labels and you had some sort of sample. So you stuck that label to each of your baggies for whatever sample you're taking. Send them to the lab or whatever situation you might have for that setup. Now you have the thing you're going to assess with that label. So you could have that barcode scanner, whether it's a handheld one. Here in our office, I've got just a handheld scanner, almost like you'd see at the grocery store, that just has a USB on the end. So you would just plug it into your computer and scan. Otherwise, your tablet could have a barcode scanner on it. I don't know if the Windows camera app by default does much with barcodes. I'd have to play around with that. But at any rate, somehow get a device that can scan the barcodes. And this read from scanner then, essentially, you would set up to tell ARM what to expect from your barcode. So like we had saw a moment ago, maybe my label has that trial ID, and then it has the plot number next. Oops, so I want that to be component 2, and then maybe it doesn't have the treatment. Oh, it doesn't like that because it wants me to have my treatment here. This is goofy. Check that off. There we go. So it only has trial ID, and then the next component is the plot number, and I don't have any subsamples. So it's very simple, just trial ID and plot number is what that barcode is. maybe just to visualize that, let's go back here. So that was that barcode here. This is way too small, but that's what we're going to scan essentially. So the workflow then is your cursor's here in this barcode. And when you scan with that scanner, it's going to read that barcode and translate it into the trial ID and the plot number. And it's going to, from a technical standpoint, it basically just pastes that value into wherever your cursor is at. So if I were to cheat here, since I don't have my barcode scanner connected at the moment, I'm going to just cheat and pretend. So I'm putting in my trial ID, and then what's my separator? It wants the delimiter here, probably just, I can enter anything. So I'll use a period as our separator, and then the plot number. So we'll go 102. So this is basically simulating me having a barcode available to scan. So when you hit the scan button, oh, it's not going to like me. Here we go. I'll use the period. So when I scan, it's going to do basically the same thing as if I pasted here. And so when you scan now, ARM reads and says, all right, this is my trial ID and this is my plot number. So now type in your assessment. Okay, this one is a 12. I'll hit enter. Then I would scan again and I'll just cheat and say, all right, this is going to be plot 103. Again, this is the equivalent to scanning in the barcode, and it'll find plot 103 and put in 15. And so you can continue to scan your barcode, type in your assessment, scan the barcode, create your assessment. And then now when we say okay, it should put that into select which column that I should put in that data. I guess I probably should have created an assessment column before we did that, but let's just see if it'll let us put it into a column number 6. There we go. So here, now that I finished, it found my trial ID, of course. So it could have been across several trials, found the plot number and put in that data. So hopefully that's a good visualization. It was a little choppy because I didn't have a label handy, but that would be the workflow. Again, I did this in regular ARM. You could do the same thing on a tablet. That read from scanner isn't specific to the tablet data collector. You know, if you had ARM on your computer in the lab or something like that, you could take advantage of that. We don't currently have that for ARM mobile. I would have to double check, but I don't believe that there's a tool within the ARM mobile that'll read from scanner like that. I'm just jotting that down to double check, but I haven't seen anywhere in the app to read from the scanner. I think that would be something that perhaps the developers would consider if it was popular enough. Probably one of those kind of on-demand things. If there's a really good use case, people would use it for that. But so far, haven't heard a lot of requests for that. But yeah, hopefully that's kind of the other side of these barcodes, to give an idea of what you can do with it. Of course, those barcodes really, again, that would apply on either one of these types of labels. So typically, as I said, you know, kind of years and years of this has been in here in ARM, and invariably when I'd show people this functionality, they'd say, hey, that's cool, and I really like the, you know, the experimental container one line. That's great, except could I, you know, make the you know, protocol ID larger? or can I make this treatment smaller? You know, there's just something you just would like to fidget with a little bit and make it your own, would be kind of a common question. And so for a while there, we would kind of just create a new label and you'd find it in your next update of ARM. Hey, there's a new label in there. But of course, that was limited to, you got to wait for a programmer to create that and then distribute it. And so we said, well, how about we open things up a little bit so anyone can create their own label. So, and if you don't find anything you like, you want to customize something that maybe it's close, you kind of like this style, but you want one other piece of information, or you don't want the formulation on there, or whatever the case may be, you can create your own labels. So that is our custom labels. So just to introduce that, again, the goal here is to choose the information, that, you know, the data that's on the label, and the formatting. You can have kind of free reign on all of that decision making for your own label. And essentially what we're doing then in ARM is just exporting the label information to a CSV file, which then you can use in any label making software of your choice. So that is our raw data labels CSV export. So of course that doesn't have a report preview. If I select the raw data labels, let me clear out this one. You can see that we have some options. There's actually a couple of ways to do this. So we did put the raw data labels here right with all of the other labels to make it easy to find. This is also really exporting data. So you'll actually also find this in your file export options. There's a raw data labels there. And it really just brings up that very same data export options, but there's a new file type for the raw data labels. And you'll see these are really the same options on this dialog as in the print reports. So you can do it either way. It'll give you the exact same outcome, just kind of two different ways to find it. So with that raw data labels, we're basically creating a table. The CSV is kind of a Excel table without any formatting. It's essentially what it is. So you can choose the delimiter for, you know, creating that table, what should separate each table value. We'll just use comma here in our case. Then the choice comes here in your label format. So this is really what information should we bring with that export, and not just the information, but kind of how it's structured. So this is really kind of the biggest, I'll call it the biggest decision to make with the export. And so we have 4 different options. Actually, we have a 5th one now I'll have to add here, but treatment line will give you a, it comes down to how many labels and for what are you making a label for, essentially. So the treatment line will create a label for each treatment line component of the trial. So if treatment 2 has 3 different products, you know, just applied at different times or something, then I'm going to end up with a different label. I'm going to end up with 3 different labels for treatment number 2, 1 for each of those components. And so you would see that the information exported for that is going to be related to treatments primarily, whether you want to put the formulation down, the product rate. You can actually get the amount of product to measure from your spray sheet. That can be included in a label. The next one would be treatment. So maybe you have multiple components, but you only want 1 label for each treatment number. So that would be treatment. And so if you have multiple components, then let's just say treatment name, if you put in the treatment name information, it's going to be concatenated. Let me just cancel here just to show an example on your treatments. Here I've got treatment 5. I have 2 pieces of, 2 rows. So I would just have that information combined. So I would end up with the myco 60 plus, and then the little plus symbol, and then the fungal, all as one value in that export. So that way it's combined and condensed down into just one label. Then the multi-line treatment, that gives you a label for each treatment times application code combination. So that's really, if I have a treatment component that's applied 3 different times, I'm going to get a label for that treatment, 3 different labels, one for each of the codes it's linked to. So that label is really kind of, maybe it's a container label. It's something kind of specific for making an application, would be the typical target for that type. And then we have plot, probably the most straightforward one of the choices. You get one label for each plot experimental unit in that trial. And we do have, you can notice it's highlighted because it is brand new within the last version or 2. We do have another label format for assessment column. And I want to make sure I describe that correctly. So I'm going to bring up the help to make sure I say it correctly, because the first time I read it, I had it backwards. So the assessment column is basically you get to select, and ARM will prompt you to show you the assessment editor. You can select particular assessment columns and the header information that gets included. So it'll be trial ID and your treatment number, and then whatever assessment information you chose. So a little bit different flavor there than most of what we're talking about. A request came for that. I don't think it's probably super common, because it's not a label for each assessment or anything like that. But at any rate, that's really the big choice here that you're going to make, is what output, what label am I creating, essentially, and how many do I need? That's the question I ask when helping people to figure out which one I should choose. What object are you creating the label for? How many of them do you need to get that? Especially the treatments, of course, there's just different angles to take there. So I'm trying to choose the right one there, is the trick, I guess you could say. So for today's sake, I'm just going to take treatment line. So as you can see here, we'll end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different labels, then one for each line here on the editor, even though, of course, I've only got 5 treatment numbers. Certainly, if you are planning to do a fair amount of label creating, you can choose more than one. And then you have an option, they can either be saved in their own files or one kind of master file that then can be easy to leverage. And we'll see the whole workflow here in a minute. It might be a little easier to visualize that. So I'm going to then create that export. Oh, I don't want all of these. Let's just do the treatment line. And it's just going to, I'll just drop this on the desktop here for now. It's going to create a file. This is my trial ID, and then the treatment line CSV to help us remember what we chose. Looks like I've done this once already. Let me just replace that file. So it's going to send out some information for creating labels to that location. And there it just popped open where that file is on my computer. So if I just real quick to visualize what we've done, if I open this file in Excel, we'll just see it's a table of information about the trial. There's the trial ID, the protocol ID, some treatment details, as you can tell. So this is all of the different components that we will be able to choose from to create a label. And we won't actually use this CSV directly, but instead we can now use whatever label making software that we would like, and we can feed that CSV to that label software. Now, in my case, I'm just going to use good old-fashioned Microsoft Word. Certainly, there may be a variety of other software, but this one is probably the most common that you likely already have. And so what I'll do here in Word is use the mail merge to create custom labels. And so in the mailings tab here, I think the easiest way to do this is it has a nice wizard. If I do a start mail merge and do the step-by-step mail merge, that was kind of the easiest, at least for me. It guides me so I don't get lost. And so over on the right, then we just have this wizard that we can step through. And so we are creating labels as our document type. Then the next step is to set up our document layout. So we want to change this layout, this document that I have here, which is blank at the moment, and we'll want to create the layout that we want, essentially. So first step is to define the label options here as to, okay, what was my target? Again, kind of that same process we did in ARM on the built-in is what type of label sheet is my target? And Word has got all sorts of options for all the different companies that may make labels. I'm just going to take Avery again. And I'm just going to grab one. I'm not even sure what this one might be. But it looks like it's close to the 8.5 by 11, so that should work for this page for us. So you would select whatever sheet you would have. And so you can see it adjusted my page size a little bit. Actually, it looks like it's horizontally oriented, but that's just fine. So that way it can kind of set up our sheet. And actually, I'm going to view my grid lines. That'll kind of help. Oh, and that shows that we picked kind of a strange one. That's all right. We'll just run with it. So this is my first label, is this size here, but it extends all the way across the page and then goes down to this one. But that's just fine. Then we will say next, since we've set up our page to match the labels we're going to print out. So the next step is to select our recipients, but that's really our treatment lines or our plot or whatever we're going to create. And so this is where we can direct Word to that CSV file that we generated. So I'm just going to drop over to my desktop where we just saved that CSV. And it is not really sorted very nicely. Let's do date modified. There's our CSV file that I want to use. So now it's connecting to that CSV. It's asking my separator. So that was the choice I made in ARM to export what separator did I want to use. So since I chose comma, that's the one I would want to pick. And I do have column headers to identify what information was exported. Not sure why it's asking me twice, but there we go. It figured it out. So now Word was able to understand what that export really has. So here we get a nice preview of that, all that data that we had exported. This can be a nice opportunity to sort I've had people ask, can I sort the order that ARM generates those labels to? This would be where you can do that right at this step. You can sort or filter. You can kind of change as Word is about to bring in all of this data from our labels. This is really your chance to change. Maybe for whatever reason, I want to sort my treatments in descending order. So the very first label I have is going to be actually the last treatment component in my list for whatever reason. This would be kind of the best place to do that here in this flow. So then I'll say, okay, and that now hooks up our label information to this document so that each row in that table is going to be its own label here in my Word document. So then next step is to arrange your labels. So now I can go to this document and really create the label that I want. So whatever information that I might want to have, I'm just going to be pretty basic. Maybe I want my trial ID. So I am typing in the prompt, however I'd want it to look like. Maybe I'll put 3 spaces after that. And now I want to actually put in the trial ID for the label. To do that, then I would insert a merged field. So these are all of those column headings that we saw in our output. And so I want to insert the trial ID. So here on this label now, it will print the words trial ID on every single label, but then it will insert the trial ID from my spreadsheet when it goes to create this label. And maybe I want to go down here and put in my treatment number. And I can insert another field. TNO is my treatment number. And maybe on the same line, I'll put in my treatment name. So maybe I don't need number, I'll just say treatment. So I want my treatment number and then a space and then the treatment name. You can build whatever content you would want. You can also change the formatting just like in any Word document. So I'm going to highlight maybe my prompt I want to be bold. So just that text I'll make bold, but maybe all of this whole line I want a little larger. And then treatment, maybe I'll take all of that and want all of that larger, even larger still. Maybe we'll go to 16 and make the treatment bold and red. I mean, you can do whatever you like, just like in a Word document here for the label. So one question might be, of course, what the heck does all of these things mean? Hopefully I'm not needing to remember all of that information. So we do have a document out on our website that I've been using to kind of step through this process that just kind of outlines what we've done so far for creating these labels. And on that second page, there is a cheat sheet. That's kind of what I've called it. If I select that, it is a PDF document that kind of decodes all of the headers for whichever output you chose. So this might be simplest just to print out so you have next to you, but really would tell you then, since we chose treatment line, this is that column that we just saw in Word of all of those different codes, and you probably don't know what any of them mean, but that's fine because then we decode to tell you what that actually is. So if I was looking for the application code, I would insert TAC, and then we just reference where that's coming from if you weren't quite sure. As you can see, we actually can include like the amount of product to measure, some information that you can only get on the spray seeding plan even can be part of this. And so same thing for the plot output, the treatment information, the multi-line, and the assessment. That's all of the different assessment headers that you can have. So that's out on our website. Be real nice to kind of print out again. Doing this process once seems a little tricky. Once you've actually done it yourself, it's a whole lot easier. I can vouch for that because when I was learning how to do this, when we were adding this feature, Kyle from our office, he had done this before. So, oh yeah, it's super easy. You just got to do this, this, this. I'm like, okay, that sounds like a process. That sounds kind of hard. But we sat down together and he showed me how to do it. And once I did it once, I was like, oh yeah, this makes sense. So probably sounds kind of hard right now. I don't know of a better way to make it sound less hard, but I can promise you that once you've done it once, it just kind of clicks. I think you have to do it once yourself just to get the feel for just how easy it really is. So maybe I'll just do one more line here just for kicks. Insert that field, and we had looked for APA. And maybe that's the biggest information I have anyway, so let's just make that huge and italics, whatever you'd want to format. Again, you just take that text that's in the little chevrons there, and that really will be whatever content was from that CSV. So kind of build your label the way you would want. And that's really that step here, is to arrange your labels. Then one little trick is you'll notice I've done this here on this first label, but the next labels are still empty. So for whatever reason, you have to press this Update Labels button. Do that either up here or there's an Update All Labels over here in your wizard. And that will then basically save your changes to this first label and insert them on all of the other labels that are on that sheet. For whatever reason, it doesn't do that automatically, but Update Labels will. So then if I make a change, sign for whatever reason, I don't know why we would, Update Labels, it'll make that adjustment. So just remember to do that as kind of that next step before you're ready to move on. So then moving on, we will to preview your labels. So if you notice, all of a sudden we've changed our view. Instead of that coded value, suddenly we have the label like we will see it when we generate it. So it has populated from that CSV from our trial the information we want. So I've got treatment 5, that fungal component, and the amount that we'll need to measure. The next label is that next component, the myco, then another label for treatment 4, the tilt, etc. So that's a nice way then to preview. All right, did I make things fit correctly now that I actually have that information? You can toggle that preview on and off if you want, just up here. So maybe I realize that this is a little too large. I could tweak it down, then hit preview and make sure things are going to fit nicely, etc. So once everything looks good, you like what you've created, then we complete the merge. And so now we really have two options here. What we can do is, if we want to save this format, we did all this work for this one trial, but then we can actually save this document as a template. So that way we can use it again and again for other trials. We don't have to rebuild the labels every single time. So really the key would be here, I'm going to take what I have, which would be all of my labels I've generated for this particular trial, and I'm going to edit the individual labels. So this is going to pop out a new document specific to this trial. And I'm going to, I want to take all of the components, all of the treatment lines. So it went really fast, but actually created a separate window where it no longer has that link. It's very literally just that preview. There is no mail merge or anything now. It's just the document. And so here now I could, if I needed to save this and put it onto the computer that's connected to the printer, or I could just send this to my printer. This is literally the labels for that one trial. So I can save or print it and be done with it. But I do want to go back to that original document we have, and I want to save this as a template. So I'm going to save this document, and I'll just browse out to my desktop probably again because I'm lazy. But you can save this as my, in this case, maybe I'm going to call it my treatment line template. And now what I can do, since I put all this time into creating this label, then next time in ARM, if I open another trial, I can do that same export of treatment line information, and I'll end up with a separate CSV file with that particular trial's information in it. Then I can open up my template document, and all I have to do is select recipients and choose a different list file. So here I've got one just sitting here from a totally different file. It says combined, so there's probably a few different components involved, but let's just say I created this separate one. And then I can go through that same process. I'm just going to guess that it's a comma here and hope that I'm right. I can go through that same process, and now it's updated my labels for that trial information. It looks like it didn't have anything very exciting in it, but at any rate, so although it seems time consuming today as we walk through that process, it's a do it once and now it's automated. Kind of a common theme for ARM. It takes a little bit that first time you do it, but now you have something that can be used again and again. And it will only take you 5 minutes to get those labels generated now for the next trial, even though it took us 20 the first time. So that was the key to when you're all done, save this document so that way you can use it again and again. And so here's those links again for kind of that process with Microsoft Word. Again, pretty easy, just search labels on our website and you can find them. They'll come up pretty easily. Just real quickly, a word on barcodes and subsamples. The barcodes are actually just a font. So it's a kind of surprising, but you can actually create your own barcodes in these custom labels just by using a font. So if I did trial ID space plot number space treatment number, and actually in theory I should probably insert the merge field so it actually uses the real information, but you can take that text and just change the font. So you can see actually in my recently used fonts that ARM, the barcode fonts that are options within ARM, those are actually just installed in Windows as fonts. So they're available to you as well. So you can see that they're named WASP. So they're typically in your full list, they're all the way at the bottom. There's a slight preview. So you can see they are barcodes. And so the name will kind of match the barcode name. So for example, WASP 39 is code 39 in ARM. If you've done the barcode fonts, I'll try to do this real quick. Page setup, barcode font. So these are a few different options. So there's a code 93 that, if you were using that barcode within ARM, you would also see then in Word, oops, wrong document, select that text. We should have a WASP 93 in the list. That would be the very same. So WASP 93. And then some of these other variants are just the L's and the C's are the different options. So H and L are high and low resolution. M would be medium resolution. And then captions, I think the C would indicate that there's captions on there, which was the, oh, and then that's black, so now I can't see it. I can make that font larger too, probably. So I actually have a barcode here now, and that's just the font of that text I just selected. Kind of ran out of time a little bit. If you are trying to get that to work and struggling a little bit, let us know. We can kind of walk you through that. Subsamples was my last bullet point. Currently, we don't have a specific option in the raw data output to create subsamples, kind of like what we had done in ARM with the pre-built. We don't have that capability currently. I did create an Excel macro that I think would work, but I would just need a guinea pig if you're feeling brave to see if it actually works. So if you are trying to create your own labels, trying to get subsamples to work and you're feeling brave, just contact us and we can see if we can make that work the way I hope it will. So. All right, I ran a little long on time. I appreciate everyone for joining us. I have a couple minutes here to hang on if you did have a question for me, but I don't want to hold anyone hostage either. So I appreciate you all joining us. We've got one more webinar next week, and then we'll probably go on hiatus as at least here in the Northern Hemisphere, things are kicking into gear. So thanks everyone for joining. I'll hang on the line for another minute in case you're typing up a question, and hopefully we'll be seeing you soon again at a webinar.